The hissing sound continued. There was no place to get away from it. The pain came at random. For no reason they could discern, and they clung together in their confusion. Hold still, a voice said, and they trembled with fear, for they knew the terrifying voice well. Frozen like a frightened animal trying to hide out, but completely exposed. Inner bloody screams silent in the world. The shadow blotted out the light from above. Keep looking and I will keep taking the parts of you that wiggle. The voice growled. The hissing grew louder, and with a sudden snap and a flash of shocking pain, the shadow withdrew, holding something in his hands. I'll be back soon. I was gone for less than an hour, John said in a low voice, leaning on so Jessica could hear him over the sound of the hospital waiting room's TV. I came back and he was lying there. If I had just stayed with him a little longer, he showed off, and Jessica gave him a sympathetic look. He grabbed his backpack off the floor and put it on his lap, touching the front pocket to reassure himself that Theodore's head was still where he stuffed it. Do you think it was just someone with a grudge? She asked, then flushed. I don't mean just like it's not a big deal, but I mean, I'm sure Clay made his fair share of enemies, being the police chief. It probably didn't have anything to do with, she glanced around and lowered her voice, anything to do with us. Joan looked down at the backpack in his lap. The door was shredded, Jess. Jessica looked nervously down the hallway, like she was worried Clay might hear them. Well, regardless, it's not your fault. A heavy silence settled in between them, only punctuated by the half-crazed voices coming from the TV, which was showing a montage of ghastly-faced clowns. For a moment, John was distracted, searching for a glimpse of the apparition who had suddenly passed them in the street, but she was not among the crowd. People are going crazy this weekend, Jessica said, recalling his attention. Dressing up in those costumes. Did you hear about the kid who got kidnapped? Yeah, John said. Claire told me about it. Actually, when I went to see him, John broke off as the nurse with blue scrubs walked off purposefully. John, Jessica? She said if she already knew the answer. Yeah, that's us, Jessica said with a hint of anxiety. The nurse gave her a smile. Chief Burke wants to see you. I tried to tell him visits are supposed to be immediate family only right now, but, well, Chief's orders. The room was only a few doors down the hallway, but the bright lights and slick grayish surfaces are disorientating. John went to ward off the offensive glare. Jessica was in front of him, and he bumped into her before he realized she had stopped just short of Clay's door. What's the matter? He asked, confused as to why she was standing still. She turned around and moved close to whisper. Can you go in first? Yeah, of course, he said, understanding. He's not that bad, Jess, I promise. Still, she made a concerned face and stepped back so John could approach the doorway. The door was open. He could see Clay, apparently asleep. He was in a hospital gown and with the blood clean from his face. His skin looked sallow. A line of black stitches ran from his forehead to his cheekbone, splitting his eyebrow. He almost lost that eye. Jessica jumped. The nurse had apparently followed them. He looks pretty out of it, John said quietly. Are you sure he wanted to talk to us? He's drifted in and out. The nurse replied in a normal tone of voice. Go ahead. I won't hurt him to talk for a bit. Hey, Clay, John said awkwardly as he approached the bed. Carlton and Marla are on their way. They will be here soon. Jessica looked sideways at the elderly woman asleep in the other bed, and the nurse stepped past her, closing the curtain between the two patients. Privacy, if you can call it that, the nurse said drearily, and then left, closing the door partway behind her. As soon as she was out of the room, Clay's eyes opened. Good, he said. His voice was reedy, and he didn't lift his head from the pillow, but his eyes were sharp. Don't pull any plugs just yet. I'm still here, Clay said lightly, and John gave him a weary smile. Okay, not yet, he agreed. How are you feeling? Jessica asked. Get my jacket, Clay said, pointing to the enclosure's only chair, where a dark gray sport coat was draped over the back. Jessica hurried to get it, and Clay fumbled around with it for a minute, finally extracting a long white envelope from the inside breast pocket. He held it out to John, sitting up slightly. John took it, and Clay fell back on the pillow, breathing heavily. Take it easy, John said, alarmed. Clay nodded weakly, his eyes closed. It has to have a range, he mumbled. What? Jessica leaned in beside John, and they exchanged a worried look. It has to have a maximum range. Clay's head lolled to the side of his breath slowed. He seemed to be drifting out of consciousness again. Should we get the nurse? Jessica looked to John, who appeared at the monitor, then shook his head. His vitals look okay. You're not a doctor, John. Shut the door a little more, John said, ignoring her. Jessica did what he asked begrudgingly, leaving it a few inches ajar. John turned the envelope over. It was unaddressed, sealed, and heavy. He opened it, and something small fell out. Jessica moved to grab it, and John took out the rest of the contents. It was a stack of photographs, about an inch thick. The top one of him and Charlie in the restaurant only the night before. It seemed to have been shot from outside the building, through the front window. John continued to browse the photos. Each one tracked through his evening with Charlie until they had parted ways, eating, coming out of the restaurant, and saying goodbye. The pictures all taken from a distance. In some, the image was askew or the figures blurry. The photographer had not been interested in composition. There was a last shot in the sequence, Charlie walking away toward the crowd by the new pizzeria. John could make out the back of his own head on the bottom corner of the photo. He quickly put it behind the others and kept looking. The next sequence showed Jessica and Charlie in a clothing store, coming in and out of a dressing room in various outfits, talking and laughing. The pictures seemed to have been taken from the other side of the store. The edges of them were obscured by fabric, as if someone had been hiding behind a rack of clothes. John felt a stab of angry revulsion. The restaurant pictures were bad enough, but this seemed far more intrusive. An invasion of an intimate moment. He glanced at Jessica. She had moved to the window, holding something up to the light, and after a moment, John realized that it was a strip of film. He squinted over her shoulder, and she lowered it, turning to face him. All the pictures in this are of us, she said quietly. He held up the stack of pictures. These two. Jessica held out a hand silently. He passed her half the stack, and they each sorted their share. The photos covered several more moments on time. There was a set of Jessica and Carlton meeting Charlie at a cafe. John showed one to Jessica, and she nodded. That's when Charlie first got back, she said, her brow forward, and then she held up a shot of her, Charlie, and Marla coming out of the building. This is my apartment complex, she said, her voice tense. John, this looks like somebody hired a PI to follow all of us around. How did he get these? And why? I don't know, John said slowly, looking back down at the photo in his hands, the last in the stack. That picture had been taken at night, outside, but the figures were clear. He himself was facing the camera, his eyes shoved into his pockets, the despair in his face visible even at a distance. Charlie had her back to the camera. She was hugging herself so tightly that she see her fingers gripping the back of her dress. A contoured, useless comfort. Charlie. His head was too tight. His chest ached. John reflexively bent the photo and put it in his pocket, then turned his head to make sure no one had noticed. Jessica had nothing. John cleared his throat. The reason I went to see Clay was that I wanted to show him something. What is it? Jessica stepped closer. John went to the door and peered out, then snuck a glance behind the curtain at the elderly woman. She was still asleep. He took off his backpack and got Theodore out. Jessica yelped, then slapped a hand over her mouth. Where did you get him? She demanded. John took a step back, stopped by her sudden, searing scrutiny. What's wrong with you? He asked. It's weird. I always hated that thing. Jessica fluttered her hand by her face. Charlie's robotic experiments always creep me out, but it's kind of nice to see it. Well, this one has an interesting secret. Don't let Charlie see it. She's been throwing away things like that. Anything from her dad. It's probably some kind of 5-step grief acceptance thing, but still. No, I'm not going to show her this. This is going to sound crazy, but Theodore's been talking to me, and yesterday he didn't have to continue. A garbled, static-filled noise reached from the rabbit's head, and Jessica winced. Before she could see anything, the sound changed. Now she knew the words. They were perfectly clear. Jessica tilted her head to the side, listening intently. Is he saying Silver Reef? She asked. Shining Star. Shining Star Silver Reef. Theodore was still repeating the phrase, but John shoved them back into his backpack and covered him with a mostly clean t-shirt, muffling the sound. Remembering the pictures, he bundled them back into the envelope and added them to the bag before zipping it back up. You got it quicker than I did, he told Jessica. She nodded absently, a faraway look in her eye. Silver Reef, she repeated. Does it mean anything to you? He asked with a spark of hope. It's a town near Hurricane, she said. Maybe Charlie's family used to live there? John said. Jessica shook her head. No, it's a ghost town. Nobody lives there. Jessica, John! Marla's voice pierced the quiet, and they turned to see Carlton beside her, his face pale and tense. He brushed past the others and went straight to the bed. Dad, are you okay? He hovered beside Clay, reaching out to touch his hand, then pulling away. Is he okay? He glanced back at the others, and Marla hurried forward, examining the monitors. He's okay, Carlton, Marla said, putting a hand on his shoulder, and he nodded sharply, not taking his eyes off Clay's still face. He'll be fine, John said, trying to sound confident. He was just awake, talking. The nurse said he's going to be okay. What happened? Carlton asked quietly, and John shook his head. I don't know, he said helplessly. I got there too late. Carlton didn't answer, but pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down. He rested his chin on his fist, hunching over. It'll be okay, Marlowe repeated, then glanced around the room with a puzzled expression. Where did she go? Who's with you? Jessica said alarmingly, looking to John. John was looking at the door. Charlie had stopped just outside the room. Charlie, hey, come in. He spoke loudly, wondering with guilt if she had heard any of the conversation that had taken place. She stepped into the room but hung back. John glanced at his backpack on the floor at the foot of Clay's bed. The noise seemed to have stopped to his relief. When he looked up, Charlie gave him an embarrassed half smile. I don't like hospitals very much, she said softly. Is he okay? She didn't turn her head, and John realized that she was deliberately staying where she couldn't see Clay. He's going to be, he said. He's going to be okay. She nodded, but stayed where she was, looking unconvinced. He's lucky you got there, Marla exclaimed. John, you must have saved his life. Maybe, he said. I don't know. He squeezed her hand and then let go of it. He turned back to Charlie. She gave him a small, tight smile, her arms folded. The nurse came in and Marla intercepted her, pulling her aside for an update on his condition, and Jessica took the opportunity to lean in. John, I'm going to leave. I've got classes this afternoon. Pick me up at 7. Don't be late. Right, John whispered. Jessica made her way past everyone, and through the door. Charlie watched her until she was out of sight. Then she looked at John again, making eye contact only for a moment before turning her attention back to the nurse. John glanced around the room. With Jessica gone, he felt suddenly untethered, less at ease among these people than he had already been. Without another word, he slipped out of the door, ignoring the soft sound of Marla calling his name. He was only a few feet down the hall, and when Jessica caught his arm, John, hey, he protested, then saw there was someone next to her, a slight blonde woman who looked like she had been crying her red eyes, the only color in her washed-out face. What's wrong? He asked wearily. This is Anna, Jessica said. Clay, Chief Burke is helping her to... She cleared her throat. Her son is missing. Chief Burke was helping. Oh, John said awkwardly. I'm so sorry, ma'am. Anna blew her nose into a crumpled tissue. I was just at the station and I overheard. They said Chief Burke was here and I just needed to know he was okay. Is he okay? She asked anxiously. He's going to be fine, Jessica said, and Anna nodded, not seeming convinced. When I went to report that Jacob was missing, the desk sergeant that filed out paperwork, he asked me about my ex-husband and said he had probably taken Jacob. I told him that man would never take Jacob. He wouldn't know what to do with him. Okay, John said, shifting uncomfortably. Well, don't worry for the police department. I know that, she said, quickly shaking her head. I'm sorry, I can't think straight. It's just I overheard the news in the reading room talking to you before. Chief Burke was there when the sergeant was telling me to call my ex-husband. He took me aside and asked me questions. He said he was going to find my son, and I believed him. He's a good officer, Jessica said softly. He's a good person. He'll find your son. Anna pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob as she began to cry again. Is he really going to be all right? I heard. She broke off, and John put a hand on her shoulder. He's going to be all right, he said firmly. He just saw him. He talked to us. Anna nodded, but didn't look convinced. Jessica gave John a helpless glance. He racked his brain for something to say. Warning. We'll find Jacob, was it? He asked, and Anna nodded tearfully. Anna, an older woman rounded the corner briskly, and Anna turned at the sight of her name. Mom, she said, the strain of her voice easily slightly. Her mother wrapped her arms around her, and Anna held on tightly, crying in her shoulder. It'll be all right, Anna's mother whispered. Thank you. She smiled silently to John and Jessica, and they nodded, exchanged a glance, and headed for the hospital entrance. As soon as they were in the parking lot, Jessica let out a gasp as she said, been holding her breath, and hugged John fiercely. He put his arms around her in surprise. It'll be all right, she said, and she pushed him away. Will it? She asked, her eyes bright with tears. It's nice to see that poor woman that Clay will find her son, but John, you and I both that when kids go missing in this town, we don't get found. John shook his head. He wanted to argue with her, but there was nothing let in on the pit of his stomach. It doesn't have to end like that at this time, he said without conviction, and Jessica straightened, wiping her eyes like it was a gesture of defiance. It can't. It can't end like that again, John. If that little boy is mixed up in all of this, we have to find him and bring him home for Michael. John nodded, and before she could answer, she strode to her car and drove away, leaving him alone in the parking lot. That night, John had barely stopped in front of Jessica's building when she came running out. She opened the car door and jumped in with lightning speed. Go, she said urgently, and he hit the gas. What's wrong? What happened? He asked. Just drive. Hurry. Okay, put on your seatbelt, he scolded as they veered around the corner. Sorry, everything, is fine, she said. I just don't like thinking someone could be out there stalking me. Yeah, he agreed, peering into the rearview mirror. But it's dark out. We should be okay. That doesn't make you feel better. So what do you think? John said after a moment. Did you notice anything about the photos? They were enough to get a restraining order in most states, she joked, but there was real anxiety in her voice. None of them were just one of us, he said, and none of them were just you and me, or just you and Marla. You mean it's about Charlie, Jessica said, understanding immediately. Isn't everything? John said drearily. The words sounded bitter, though he had not meant them to, and he glanced at Jessica, trying to gauge her reaction. She was staring out into the window like she hadn't heard him. In less than half an hour, they were at the ghost town. John stepped the car beside a wooden sign reading Welcome to Silver Reef and got out. Jessica followed. It was an odd mix, even in the dark. In the distance, he could see the crumbling walls of buildings that would never be restored, and close by were the places we built for tourists, a church, a museum, and a few others John couldn't make out. John, we're going to get killed out here, Jessica said, briefly losing her balance on the lustre and gravel. When exactly do people less live here? John asked quietly.